Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, it's Jack Edwards, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at defending the goal. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're going to be focusing on attacking and defensive overloads. But before we get into it, let's have a look at how many players we're working with this week and the equipment that we'll be using. Now, in terms of players for this week, we're going to have 15 players in total, including a goalkeeper. So for this part of the session, we're going to have 8 attackers, 6 defenders, okay, plus our keeper. Now, in terms of the setup for this part of the session, you're going to have the defenders starting just outside the 18-yard box, so about 20 yards, okay? And then you want the 2 attackers to start, who are starting here, to start between 5 and 10 yards further back from that. And then these attackers in here starting between 10 and 15 yards further back again. So it just depends on how much space you've actually got, okay, to start with. Now, this middle one here will start right in the middle of the goal, and then these ones will start between 10 and 15 yards either side. So what we're going to be having is a 4v3 scenario in favour of the defenders, a 4v4 scenario, and then a 5v4 scenario in favour of the attackers. And then afterwards, these attackers, these 3 will switch over, okay, and you can even swap the attackers over in here after a set amount of goes, and 2 defenders will swap over, and then the other 2 defenders who've swapped over will then swap over with the other ones. So they'll get 2 goes each before changing. Now, where you've got 6 players in here and 2 strikers, okay, if they are your 2 strikers, you can keep them in there, okay, or they can look to swap out with maybe the 2 wider players each time, and after a set amount of time, you can swap over with the middle players. Now, the coach can change it each time. So it'll be a wide player receiving it first. So the first time that they go, it can be this one, okay, and then as we reset afterwards, it can be the opposite side. So it gets played in. Now what we're focusing on is covering the ground quickly, okay, protecting that space. And then as the player's driving in, okay, can we get pressure on the ball whilst also maintaining our shape, okay, to protect the goal. So protecting the centre of the pitch, okay, we're looking to deflect away from goal and into an area where, okay, once this ball gets played in, we can put pressure on it again, we can drop back in, and then if a player looks to make a run on, we're going to play the offsides, okay, use the overload to our advantage, force the players into congested areas, force them to try and play a pass, okay, which we can intercept, and then the play will be finished. Now, you can insert a couple of goals, maybe to the side or in here, for the defenders to play into if you wanted to, or as soon as they've won it back, they can just look to clear it. As soon as that first one's finished, we're then going to play to the opposite winger, okay? And now it's a 4v4 scenario. So now we've got to focus on, okay, the runners, so if a player looks to make a run in behind, okay? We've got to be ensuring that we're talking, okay, might have players stretching the pitch, players looking to play in. So making sure that we know when to engage, okay, and we know when we're not engaging to keep the spaces in between each defender quite tight. So look, we're protecting that centre of the pitch again. When the play goes wide, okay, can we look to lock on there in a 1v1? What are all the other players doing? Making sure that players are marked, making sure that there's no gaps in between here. So we haven't got a player dropping too deep, okay, because then there's space for the players to run into, maintaining our line, okay, making sure that the gaps are closed, and we've got a player pressuring the ball, so then if the ball comes into this area here, it gets delivered into the box, we can back ourselves to clear it. Now, the final one then, the coach will then play into the central player, who will look to drive into space and create that overload. Now for us, what we've got to realise is, okay, deflect away from goal, okay, so he's driving in, so we're looking to step up, okay, but we're also looking to put ourselves in a place where we're compacting and forcing our way. We don't just want to go gung-ho, because we're going to leave space to play through. Stay compact, okay, step up as a unit, okay, and then again, force that ball away from the centre of the pitch. So force it wide. When it goes wide, we shuffle across, okay, as a unit, force it to go down the line, and we're saying, okay, deliver that ball into the box, we can back ourselves. If it comes back into the centre, we step back up, we step in central, okay, we prevent them playing through us, okay? So then if it goes wide again, say to this player, he's got pressure on the ball in here, Are we happy with them having a shot from there? Yes, okay, because look at the angle where they're going. The keeper's most likely going to save it. So we're trying to think of areas where we're trying to show the opposition into. So we're deflecting away from goal, okay, we're denying that space. We're trying to manipulate the attacker, and let's say eventually they get it out and have a shot and it goes wide. We've done our job. Players then swap over. So let's say the two fullbacks swap over. They will then come in here. We have, let's say the two attackers stay the same, and then we've got these three players swapping over with these three players. We get the balls back in, and then we're set to go again. So we're mainly focusing on the defenders, but if you want to obviously if you're trying to work with your attackers as well, you're working on their movements and you're trying to help them with their movements and support runs to make it more difficult for our defenders as well. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now moving into the first of our small-sided games, which is going to be focusing on maintaining our defensive line and then protecting the space in behind, which is going to be an offside zone. So in terms of the setup for this part of the session, so from the goal line here to where we're going to have the offside line, just outside the 18-yard box, so about 20 yards. Now, the distance between the line here to then the next area, you can go full half of the pitch if you want to as well, okay? So you can go, or you can just go about 25 to 30 yards. So in total, you're going to be going about 50 yards of depth. So again, around about the halfway line point, if you've got that space. In terms of the width, these wider areas here are going to be 10 yards, and the central area is going to be about 30. Okay, so you're going to have 50 yards in total. Now, the Blues can set up in a different formation if you want them to, and so can the Reds, depending on your defensive shape. We're going to have the Reds in kind of 4-3-3 with a single pivot, and we're going to have the Blues with two midfielders, okay, two full-backs, and then a front three. So trying to stretch the pitch. If you wanted to, though, you could have three midfielders, two strikers, and then more wide players instead, if you wanted to. Now, what the focus is going to be for them is just try and break down the opposition to score. What we're trying to do is maintain our defensive line, step with the ball, and then drop at certain times as well to win the ball back, and can we play into this goal here. Okay, so it can be a first-time finish if you want to do it. You could set out an area where they've got to try and get into to score as well. And what we're trying to do is defend in central areas as much as we can, protect the goal. Okay, we're trying to defend the goal. What we don't want is, when the ball's in central areas, spread out like this, okay, because we're leaving gaps to play through. When the ball's central, players stay central, okay? When the ball comes wide, we put pressure on the ball, we shuffle across, and again, we're protecting that centre of the pitch by closing this area off. For the Blues, they look to work the ball quickly. So when the ball comes in centrally, okay, with these two deeper players here, this is where we want our two players here screening passes. Okay, so we have this player putting pressure on, but screening that pass away. And then we have this player putting pressure on, but we're not stepping up here because we're leaving that there. Okay, so we're saying, okay, we can control that. We can control these passes that are going across. So then if the player then opens out and it goes into here, comes across, they can then step into this area here to help defend against the winger. Now, if the opposition do break into these areas here, then we've got to think about engaging. Okay, so centre-backs getting in tight, making sure that we're protecting those spaces. Okay, so then the ball goes into that 18-yard box. Can we look to win it? And if we need to, clear our lines. Now, what we don't want to see is dropping into this area too early. Okay, because what we're inviting pressure in and around the box then. We're happy controlling it back here. So the ball's here. Okay, we need to make sure that we're stepped up the pitch. If a player's head goes down, okay, so if they're going to play long in behind, that's when we can look to drop. But at the same time, it's a trigger for us to say, okay, now we can look to step, hold that line, okay, to then ensure that someone's offside. So if we've got a player here, and this player opens out and gets the head up, step up, okay, to force this player to be offside. So it's in terms of practicing for in a game, being able to maintain that high line, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we're doing it early, okay, and we're making sure that we're all on the same line. Whereas if we've got players in here and one player's up on the same step, okay, we've got to think about, wait there, we're not in a position to do it. Now we're going to drop instead, okay, to try and defend that longer ball. And when the ball does go long and drop, the midfielders can't just stay in the same position. They've got to make sure when the ball travels behind them that they're dropping with it to protect the space in between the lines in case there's a nod flick down or another ball for a second ball, that we can win it. Whereas if we're in these areas here, okay, there's going to be a chance for a player to get on a loose ball and have a shot to score. So the main things we're focusing on is our distances between each other, okay, showing the passes away from congested areas, okay, making sure that we're defending the centre of the pitch to protect the goal, when to step, when to drop, when to hold our line, and make sure that we maintain that at the right times, but we're also aware of players in the space that are around us as well. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, now moving into the final part of this week's session, we're now moving into our second small side game-based scenario, which is going to be focusing, defending it in one half of the pitch. Okay, so trying to make sure that when we're making it difficult for the opposition to move the ball across and out to the other side. Now, in terms of the setup for this part of the session, similar to the last one, about 50 yards of width. Again, you can increase that if you've got more numbers to make it more difficult for the defenders. And then in terms of our depth, about 50 yards again, and we'll go 40 yards up until this area here, okay, and we have 10 yards for the area where, okay, the Reds can score. So you've got to receive it or dribble the ball into this area to score on the small-sided goals. So what we're focusing on is when the ball's in this half of the pitch, we've got our players, okay, defending in one half. Obviously, we're not going to have the left back in here, okay, it's too tight. But if you'll see, out of the 7 players, we've got 5 players in that area of the pitch, okay, and you've got your 6th and 7th player, okay, protecting that side. So what we're trying to do is making sure that when we're in our possession, okay, we're not too spread out, because look at it, space to play out and play through the opposite way is too easy. Well, what's our focus? Defend the goal. So protecting the goal, getting ourselves in here, okay, so when a pass goes into here, when the opposition looks to play across, they've got to go all the way out there, okay? But then as that's happening as well, when a player looks to come out, can we then look for the player to then jump out to try and press that ball? Okay, but that's at the right time, so we've got to think of the triggers again. So in terms of a back to goal, a bad pass, a bad touch, okay, a ball into a certain area as well, okay, a longer pass. So a ball can be here and it can switch that at right winger, left back looks to close down, put pressure on it, we get our players shuffling across the pitch. What we want to make sure is that these 3 players aren't staying on the same line. These 2 players are always across, supporting the playing wide areas. Now the Blues, we've got them set up in a 4-3 formation. They want to do could have like another one in front, then wide players there. But obviously again on transition, probably a bit easier for the Reds to transition and go forward, trying to protect themselves against the counter as well, where we've got to get the ball in these areas to score. But for the Reds, focusing on maintaining that line again, you can put the offside line in again if you wanted to, making sure that we're closing the gaps in between the lines, okay? We've got the distances between each player, so when the ball's central, we're central. When the ball goes wide, okay, we're shuffling across as a unit, staying compact, okay, to protect that space inside the pitch. What are we trying to do again? Control what we can, okay? So in this area here, let it go back. What we don't want to do is step into here too early, okay, off the line and leave that space inside, making sure that the only options we're given is to go backwards, okay? When it goes backwards, step up the pitch, okay, maintain the line. If a player steps in, can you go and engage? You get players around it, okay, to protect the space again. If they've got runners in between the lines of players going out here, once that ball goes in there, that's where we need players thinking about, okay, how do I support the midfielder can support inside for the full-back in there, okay, and we get players supporting each other, so that if this winger's got the ball here, and this player's engaging, this player's not too far away because we're leaving that space, centre-back gets pulled out, etc. Making sure that we've got players screening and passes, okay, our body shape's good, so then if a ball gets played down the line, we've got a chance to intercept it and go forward. But again, for the Reds, main focus is maintaining that shape, so we've got to focus and we've got to be thinking that the players are concentrating and staying focused and aware of the surroundings and communicating and organising as a unit. Try and make sure that the players are taking responsibility for that, okay, so that they're working on it in a game, making sure that they're talking to each other, making sure that their teammates are in the right positions as well. And obviously, if this is a 7-a-side team, you might have it differently, where you'd have, let's say, 2 and then you have 3 across the middle, and then you have 1 up top, and you're working on your different shape against the 7 as well. Same with if it's 9 aside. Just look to alter that depending on the age group that you're working with. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to view all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.